Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hi, Kate. How are you?
Good to see you again, Daphne, and good to see our hat
Likewise.
knitters.
Yes. We have some hat knitters piling in. The Thanksgiving holiday has not kept them all away. They're coming in one by one, which is great. Everyone, this is the third and final in our Learn to Knit a Hat series that Kate Atherley is teaching for the Fibre Co. I'm Daphne. I'm with the Fibre Co. This is Kate, in case you're doing this backwards and coming to the third class first and you don't know where you are, but we have some good things planned so that you can finish those hats you've started. And if you haven't started, please don't feel so bad, because I have something to show you. This is what mine looks like. A ball of hope.
Potential, a ball of potential.
A ball of potential.
Yes.
Actually, I do have a good reason. We have someone here in the office who's just learning to knit, and she wants to see this casting on and learning and knitting in the round thing directly from me. So I promised her I would do that on one lunch, and I will. But yeah, so don't feel bad if you haven't started. There's always hope to continue or to get started and make your very first hat. Yeah, I think a lot of people have piled in, so we'll just go ahead and get started. Kate, if you're ready, I'll put in some links to prior recordings, and if anybody has any questions, just please put them in the Q&A as opposed to in the chat, because we keep better track of them there. And do ask those questions. I'll be here helping Kate monitor those, and let's figure out how to finish these hats off.
Excellent, Daphne, thank you so much. And again, welcome to our hat knitters. It's winter, I think, is coming where many of us are. And I know that some people are going to be traveling. It's the Thanksgiving weekend in the US. So some people will be watching via recording. So we'll make sure that those demos are available for them so they can watch at their leisure. But let's talk about finishing this thing. And this is the best part of the hat because it goes quite quickly. Let me get the slides going. And what we've got here is we're going to talk about the top, and we're going to talk about some of those treatments, those fancy finishes. We'll talk about tassels and those sorts of things. And there's a few things to talk about with the hat. So decreasing, using double pointed needles, and I'm going to explain the how, but I'm also going to explain the why we use double pointed needles, because I think that can be a little bit intimidating, and they do look a bit, there's a lot of points there. So I'll talk about that. And then I will talk about weaving in ends. I'll talk about a really important step that I think is easy but gets confused, and some fancy finishing details as well. And as always, as we go, please don't hesitate to put questions in the Q&A, and both Daphne and I will be monitoring that. So for this final session, what you need is you need your double pointed needles, a set of 4, and they'll be in the size that you were knitting the body of the hat with. You'll need a removable style stitch marker, one of those safety pin style stitch markers, or even an actual safety pin works, just something that you can open. And you do need a darning needle as well. So last week, we talked about finishing up the body of the hat. And what you needed to do with this is knit until, the instruction was knit until it's long enough, right? Knit in the round. And I hope that you found that this section of the hat was easy and fun, because it really is. It's excellent television knitting. Knit, 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 right? And the pattern suggests a length, which is great if you're making the hat as a gift. That's the sort of a length to fit the average size head. But if you're making it for yourself, you can try it on, and you work until it's a specified length short of where you need it to be. So in the case of the bulky, my hat is about the prescribed 4.5 centimeters, about just a little less than 2 inches shorter than I want it. And then we start the decreases. I'm going to show you how those goes. I'm seeing some questions in the chat, in the Q&A here. I'm seeing a question about my favorite increase. And I'm seeing a question about picking up drop stitches. And you know what? Although we're about to start the decreases for the hat, this is probably a good time to talk about those because I'm just about to change off to my camera. So let's take a moment to do that. So here are my double pointed needles, by the way. Here's my removable stitch marker. And for reasons I'm going to talk about later, I have a button. All right. So to answer Winifred's question in the Q&A, there are a bunch of different increases you can use. The pattern uses the make one that goes as follows, where you lift this up from front to back and knit that through the back. That's the make one that the pattern uses. And I love doing that increase. It is straightforward to do, and it makes a nice, tidy look. So that's the increase that the pattern uses. And remember, my trick there was that if this isn't cooperating, if you're finding it hard to get the needle into the stitch, what you can do is sort of shuffle that down on the tip of the needle, hold it in place. See what I'm doing there with my index finger? Hold it in place, and it's easier to get the needle into the stitch. All right. So that's answering one question. The other question, so Yana asks a question in the Q&A about picking up dropped stitches. So here, I talked about when we have a stitch, if it just drops off the needle, you can put it back, making sure that you put the right leg of the stitch on the needle. You need to stay focused on that right leg because then that way they're the right way around and they're easiest to knit. If it just drops, that's fine, but sometimes they can unravel. So I'm going to actually, everybody hold your breath. I'm going to unravel a stitch. If this has happened to you, this is something we absolutely don't need to worry about. This is something that doesn't require any special techniques. What it does do is, what it does require is a bright light, a good light so you can see your stitches, and a crochet hook. What we do to pick up a drop stitch, do you see how I'm stretching it out? I'm going to stretch it out. So this is the loop. I'm going to take my crochet hook. Now the size of the crochet hook doesn't matter so much. I've got one I've got a big ridiculous size one, whatever size crochet hook is available to you. Just grab a crochet hook and put it through the front of that loop. And then to pick the stitch up and ladder it back up, do this. Use the crochet hook to hold that strand of yarn. You see the strand of yarn at the back? And then pull it through the loop of the stitch like so. And then when you're popping it back on the needle, put it back so the right leg is at the front. I'll drop that down even a couple rows more so you can see what happens. And in fact, it's useful if you watch me, you can sort of, I think that might show you how stitches are made, how they work. So if we've got a stitch that's dropped, and by the way, these removable stitch markers are always helpful. If you've got a stitch that's dropped, if you clip the removable stitch marker in it, it'll stop it from unraveling any further. So I feel like I should get a commission from the company that makes these. I talk about them lovingly so often. Anyway, so I poke this into the front and then grab the strand and pull it through from back to front. and grab the next strand up. And it's okay that I'm stretching these stitches out. And it's okay that I'm sort of stretching my work out because it's allowing me to make sure I'm not making any mistakes. Now, do you see what's happened there? Do you see how those two strands have sort of crossed over? That means that I was about to cause myself a little bit of trouble. So this is why I say you need a good light, because what you want to make sure you're doing is catching the next one up like so. So spread it out, take your time, make sure you're working under a good light. And there's your drop stitch. And we put it back on the needle so the right leg sits at the front. Good question, Yana. I'm glad you asked. Thank you. Okay. So it's time to work our decreases, and I'm going to show you how to work the decreases. And I'm also going to show you how we will change off to those double pointed needles. Let me change back to the slide so you can see what the instruction looks like. The decrease goes quite quickly for this hat, which is great. It's actually only 7 rounds. The first round, and by the way, this is in common for all sizes and for all different yarns. So I'm working with the bulky weight. You might be working with a different size yarn, the different thickness, the Aran or the DK weight, but these instructions are the same. It's quite clever, I think. And it says K2 tog around. So that's just a repeat. And I'm just going to do that all the way around. Knit 2 stitches and then knit 2 together. And for my size, the size that I'm working, it tells me that when that round is finished, I'll need to end up with 36 stitches. And here's a tip for you. Once you've completed the decrease round, it's always a good idea to just do a quick count to check. It's not a disaster. It's not actually a big problem if you're off by 1 or 2, because we can deal with it, but you just need to know if that's fair. So knowing that you've got the right stitch count, well, you're in excellent shape. Knowing that perhaps the stitch count isn't right is fine. It's not a source for concern, but it's just something you need to know so you can pay attention to it. Fair? All right. So I had stopped my previous round just a couple of stitches before the marker. And that's always a good habit to be in so your marker doesn't fall off. And my first decrease round goes like this. We knit 2 stitches. And then you may well have encountered a knit 2 together before. Knit 2 together. And I find this is one of these instructions where I maybe don't want to be watching television because there's a little bit of counting and keeping track to do. Knit 2, knit 2 together. Knit 2, knit 2 together. And I'm pausing and I'm doing that knit 2 stitches together. I'm sort of taking my time to do it. I'm working slowly because you want to make sure that the needle is catching both stitches and all of the strands of both stitches. Because if you're trying to do it while watching something interesting on television, or perhaps when the light is not so good, what can happen is you can inadvertently only grab one, or you can accidentally even split the stitch because you're having to grab more strands than you normally would, if that makes sense. And you just count carefully, knit 2, knit 2 together all the way around, and you will find that it will start to get a little bit sort of tighter on your needles. I'll show you what I mean. We're reducing the stitch count, and so you may have to kind of be more careful moving these around. It won't flow quite as smoothly as it does when you're just knitting all of the stitches. if you put your work down and you lose track of where you were, if you get distracted, you need to answer a text, or you just, the kettle has boiled, or for whatever reason, you put your work down in the middle of this round, I'll show you how to identify where you were. Let's look at the stitches. If I stretch this out, can you see how a normal knit stitch is a nice tidy vertical column? The result of a K2 tog and knit two together, you've got the loops of two stitches snugging together. And so if you're not sure where you were in the pattern, you can have a look. Your standard two knit stitches are nice and vertical. Your knit two together is two pulled into one. And what happens with the knit two together is it takes two stitches and it folds the one on the left over top of the one on the right. So this is actually a right leaning decrease. There's also left leaning decreases for when you're ready for next steps. But knit two together is our usual standard one. And it gets the job done beautifully. And in my finished hat, here's one I did. I finished up earlier. You get this pretty line. Right, so let me finish. Oh, and so where was I? I put it down. I don't remember where I was. Can you see there's my knit two together? I hope that's making sense. And I'm going to go all the way around and finish this so I can show you the next step. If you're working a larger size, you'll do this knit two together more times. If you're working a smaller size, you'll do it fewer times. But we've made the pattern so that this works for every single one of them. Between you and me, I always hold my breath a tiny bit because as I'm coming to the end of the round, because I just want to feel good about that final knit two together happening just at the end of the round. Right. So there we go. But we've reduced the stitch count. There are fewer stitches around our needles here. And this is why we think about these needles. So I'm just going to change to my slide. And then to show you the instructions, and then I'll come back to this. So the stitch count does get small quickly. And the way the instructions are written in the pattern, we talk about double pointed needles. And the reason we need these double pointed needles is that when you've got too few stitches to fit comfortably on your circular needle, that is when the circumference of the hat gets too small, you need to use a different kind of method, because if you've hardly got any stitches, they'll be too stretched out on that circular needle. Sometimes you might hear these referred to as a needles for small circumference in the round, because it's something smaller than your circular needle. I know that sounds like a really technical phrase there. There are other ways to do this. Some people use a method called magic loop that requires one long circular needle. Some people also use two circular needles. There are actually a bunch of different methods for this. Double pointed needles are kind of the classic, and that's the one that we're going to show you. But once you feel comfortable with those, it's worth experimenting with these other methods. So what we do here is we will change to the double pointed needles, and I'll show you how. What we need to do is clip the removable stitch marker in the fabric, and then we'll start knitting with the double pointed needles, dividing the stitches roughly into thirds as you go. And it's much easier to do this on a plain knitting round, which is what I'm just about to do. Because in the instructions, in the pattern, and I will refer you to your pattern when you're knitting, After we've finished a decrease round, then we do a plain knitting round. And I stopped at the end of the round and my marker dropped off. I have to be careful about that. If I'm going to change to my double pointed needles, the first thing I'll do is clip my removable stitch marker just in the fabric so I can keep track here. And then this is a plain knitting round. And I've counted my stitches and I know that I have the 36 that the pattern tells me I have. And so 36 divides brilliantly by 3. So I'm going to knit 12 onto each needle. And it really is a case of, similarly to how we change to a different sized up circular needle, it's just a case of bringing this new one in and starting to knit with it. And this is the stage where it feels a bit like wrestling a spiky hedgehog. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm counting as I go. And I've got 12 on my first needle. Then I'm going to start knitting the next 12 with the next of my double pointed needles. To make it a little bit easier on myself, I shuffled things up. Sort of shuffled them towards the start of the circular needle. So my next 12. If your number doesn't quite divide up neatly, that's okay, as long as you keep count. It's common practice to divide the stitches perfectly evenly across 3 needles, and that works brilliantly if your stitch count divides evenly by 3, but if it doesn't, that's absolutely fine. You can have more stitches on one than another. Try and keep them close. So I knit across the last set. And I wanted to show this on camera, just so you had a sense of how the whole process goes. What we've got now is our stitches distributed across our double pointed needle. The circular needle, the trusty circular needle we've been knitting can be retired, is now not necessary. And what have we made? We've got our marker here for the start of the round, and we've got our stitches distributed across the 3. Now to knit these, we will use our 4th. Some double pointed needles come in sets of 5. We only need 4 for this. You can use 5 if you've got a larger stitch count. And some people will use 5 if they have a number of stitches that divides by 4. In this case, this works just perfectly like this. And now we're ready for round 3, which is our next decrease round. On our next decrease round, goes as follows. It's knit 1, knit 2 together. So I'm going to use my 4th needle to knit. And when you're working on double pointed, think about it this way. You've got 3, but these 2 really are just being the world's most annoying stitch holders. The only one that you have to worry about knitting with, there's the empty needle, which you'll hold, chances are, in your right hand. And then the one with this next stitch to knit. These other 2 annoying stitch holders, that's all. I know that I need to start knitting here because this is where my stitch marker is, but I also know that I need to start knitting here because I find the working yarn, and you always knit to the left of the working yarn. So here we go. So I'm going to use my fourth needle, and it becomes knit 1, knit 2 together. And it is a little bit pokier. I don't disagree. 1, knit 2 together. But if you move slowly, and I promise this goes very quickly as well, knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together. And so I've knitted all the way across the first third of my stitches, the first needle of my round. And then I just rotate it to the right. And again, I can tell where I'm going to knit because the working yarn hangs off the stitch I've just finished knitting. And so I'm always going to work the one to the left. And again, so this is knit 1, knit 2 together. And we go all the way around, working all 3 needles worth of stitches. And yeah, that might poke in the way. And if you're worried about stitches falling off the needle, you can always just shuffle them down to the middle. This is one of the reasons I'm a big fan of using wooden or plastic needles, because they're a little bit frictiony. Metal double-pointed needles look great, but they're good because they're fast, but they're also slick, which means that you might feel like your stitches want to fall out off the needle. So the plastic ones or the wooden ones or the bamboo ones can be very helpful. Okay, so I've knitted 1, 2 of my 3 needles. And then again, I just rotate it a third of a turn to the right. And I know that I'm going to knit here because my working yarn is there. And I'll finish this round so you can see it. And there's lots of different ways people hold their needles too. That's worth just talking about for a second. I like to hold my needles so the 2 that I'm knitting with sort of are closest to me, and the other 2 are sitting in the back. I know I've said this before, but they really are just the world's most annoying stitch holders. That's honestly a point of personal preference. Some people hold them slightly differently, so those are away from them and these other stitch. As long as you're looking at the right side of your fabric, as long as you're looking at the knit side of your fabric, hold them in a way that makes sense for you. And then I do knit 1, knit 2 together. And here I am back at the start of the round. And I know that because I've got that clippy removable stitch marker. One more quick note about working on double pointed needles. So I'm just going to slide those into the middle so I'm not worried. Do you see what I mean about this being a small circumference? There's too few stitches here to fit comfortably on that needle, so we have to use this method. What some people notice is an effect that we call laddering, which is that when you're working on this kind of needle, sometimes you get a little bit of a gap. It looks a little bit stretched out in the breaks between the needles. The way that you handle that, the best solution for that is when you're knitting. So when I'm starting another needle, you pull the first stitch as tight as you possibly can, but that always gets sort of limited because it feels like those 2 needles are banging together. So the trick with this is pull your second stitch as tight as you possibly can as well. Because what that does is that makes this one really, really snug and it tidies up the gaps. All right. So I'm hoping that demo's made sense for changing to those double pointed needles. And what I want to do is go back to the slides so you can see those instructions. Now, I do see a question about loose stitches, and I'll get to that if I get a chance, because it is a good question in the Q&A, but I'll talk about these decreases. Okay. So, oh goodness, apologies. I think that perhaps the mailman has arrived. The dog is letting me know. So round 3 was the one that I just did, and I did knit 1, knit 2 together around, and I will count my stitches, and I should have 24 when I'm finished that. Round 4 is a plain knit round. And here's where we can cheat if we need to. It's not cheating, it's being smart about addressing issues. If you get to the end of round 3 and you have one more than you need somehow, if I had 25 instead of 24, if perhaps the dog barking at the mailman was distracting me, what you can do somewhere in round 4 is just work a cheeky extra decrease. No one will ever know. So you can adjust as with the increases when I talked about being able to be smart about keeping track of your stitch count with your increases. You can do it with your decreases as well. Or indeed, if you've hit at the end of round 3 and you've got one fewer stitch than you were expecting, just skip one of the decreases in the following one. That makes sense? So round 4 is a plain knit round. Knit, knit, knit. But again, a plain knit round addressing any missing or extra decreases you may need to do. I'm hoping you're finding this advice liberating, because you know what? No one will know exactly how many stitches you had at the end of round 3 when they're wearing the hat. Trust me. And I will sometimes fix a mistake in something, and the following day, I won't even notice that I've done it. As long as you've got the right number of stitches at the end, honestly, it works out. A round 4 is another plain knit round. And then round 5 is just all K2 tog. And so I'm just finishing up. See, this is where I have to knit quick to keep a little bit ahead of you. So I'm just finishing round 4. And then round 5, see, I'm at the start of my round marker. Another note about working on double pointed needles. I find it easier if I keep the one that I'm working from sort of above the other two. Just pull this up so this one is sort of stays out of the way. And it doesn't matter too much if those two bang together, but what I want to do is make sure that this yarn isn't getting wrapped around here. Does that make sense? Because that can make some extra looseness as well. So I sort of push that down. And here I'm just doing K2 tog all the way around. And I'm pulling those first couple of stitches of the needle nice and snug. Now, I'm going to just make a quick adjustment here because I want to show you something. If you find that the way that you split your stitches up, the count's a bit funny, let me show you how to address that. So if I'm doing knit 2 together, K2 tog, K2 tog, K2 tog, and I need to do a K2 tog, but I've only got one stitch here, I need to K2 tog this stitch and that one together. It's perfectly okay to just take this and pop it onto the next needle. Does that make sense? And then start that needle that way. So if you need to shuffle things around a tiny bit, you see the stitch count getting small very quickly. There we go. Okay. And let me go back to the instructions. So round 5, we K2 tog around until we've got a very small stitch count. For my size here, for the sample that I'm knitting, it's only 12 stitches. Round 6, knit with the opportunity to fix things if you need to. Hats are remarkably forgiving. And then the final round is round 7. And it's worth talking about round 7 because it doesn't seem quite as straightforward as some of the previous ones. And the reason round 7 is a little bit more complicated is simply it's got to do with whether you've got an odd number of stitches or an even number of stitches. That's all. Because if you've got an even number of stitches, round 7, you just do K2 tog all the way around once more, right? And because I'm working with 12, I just do K2 tog 6 times and I've got 6 stitches and I'm happy. But if, for example, I was doing the largest size that has 17 stitches, you can't do K2 tog all the way around because it's an odd number. So what you do with this one is you K2 tog 8 times and then you just knit that final stitch. So that's what's happening there. And this is what I mean about the numbers being a little bit forgiving too. That's exactly how we address it. If you've got suddenly have an odd number of stitches and you're supposed to have an even number of stitches, you can just knit the final stitch. It's all good. That makes sense? All right. And then, oh, just a reminder here to count the stitches after every decrease round, and you can fudge things a bit if you need to. Then, and in fact, I'm going to finish this. Shall I finish this one off? I've got one more round to knit. So we just cut the yarn and leave ourselves about a 15 centimeter, about a 6-inch tail. So let me just finish that up. And while I'm doing that, I will also answer another question. I promise, Phila, I'm not ignoring your question about loose stitches, but I want to be finished my hat before I show you that. Fair? Chantal in the Q&A has asked a chat about starting. Is it okay to use a cable cast on? Is it stretchy enough? Yeah, for our purposes for this, a cable cast on is stretchy enough. It is. It's not a cast on that I would use where you need a ton of stretch if you were doing socks or maybe a mitten cuff, but for the purposes of the hat, a cable cast on works. But I would actually encourage you to try that long tail cast on because I think it looks really nice with the ribbing. There's a tutorial on the Fibre Company website, and I think it's a good skill to have. Okay, so my final round here, so let's finish up my hat, is just K2 tog all the way around. Now, I've traveled a fair bit up from my removable stitch marker. So if you lose track of it, you can always just keep it moving up with yourself. Do you see how tiny it is on these double pointed needles? We knit 2 together, knit 2 together, knit 2 together. I'm counting as I go. And I come all the way around to the end of my round. And I've got 6 stitches at the very end. And it feels a little wobbly at this point because we have so few stitches on the needle. So this is something that I wouldn't necessarily do on a moving bus, you know? Oh, I see a question from Paula in the Q&A. Paula asks, what does KO stand for in the instructions? Paula, that's actually K0. Knit 0. There are no, it's a funny instruction, but it just means if there aren't any stitches there, you just don't knit them. Okay, that sounds like an even funnier instruction. Does that make sense though? It really just means there's nothing to knit. Okay, let me know if you need more info on that one. So I've cut the yarn and I've left myself a decent length tail, and I've threaded that onto my darning needle. And by the way, it might seem difficult to get a huge chunky yarn through the eye of a darning needle. I love these darning needles that have really nice big eyes. So my granny taught me this trick. You just sort of fold it and squish it. And that way you're feeding it through without worrying about the fluff. Then we run this yarn through the final stitches and go in the direction that you would knit. Does that make sense? So I go from here to the left. And I can take the double pointed needle out. And congratulations, you've tackled a really important and challenging skill there, working on double pointed needles. There we go. And I'm going to cinch it up. But don't cut it just yet, because I want to talk about finishing steps. Look at that, nice hat. Well done. So some finishing steps to discuss. Blocking. This is mentioned in the pattern, and I wanted to take a moment to talk about this because I think there's a bit of confusion about what this word means. When you finish knitting, well, so you sort of virtually met my dog because she was barking in the background. Apologies for that. I like to sit on the sofa and knit with the dog of an evening. Also, I tend to drink coffee or tea or other things as I'm knitting. There have been snacks when I'm knitting, and what happens is my knitting may not be entirely clean. It might have dog hair on it, it might have a coffee spill, it might have chocolate or biscuit crumbs or what have you. Also, when you're knitting, my knitting tends to get crumpled because I fold it up and jam it in the bag that I'm carrying with me, or indeed I've sometimes found the dog asleep on it, or it fell out the car, all of these things. Anyway, so it's a little bit crumpled and it might not be perfectly pristine. We use the word blocking in knitting patterns, and I think the word makes it seem more complicated than it actually is. And this is why I've always put it in little quotation marks there. Really what we mean when we say block is we mean to wash. Block is a general term. It means to finish up the fabric. And for the vast majority of our knitting projects, the right answer and the way that we block something is simply by washing it. There are special techniques you may have seen pictures of them where you see things pinned and stretched out, and there's wires and mats and all kinds of tools. That's important for things like lace shawls, where I want the open work to be visible. And it's important with lace as well, because you want to settle the fabric and even everything out, the stretching. But with something like a hat or a mitten or most sweaters or a sock, really what we mean when we say block is simply wash. Wash it the way you intend to wash the thing. Now, for our hats, which are made out of these delicious wools, these require a hand wash, just to soak in lukewarm water. You can use a little bit of a wool wash, and I usually do because, again, coffee stains, chocolate, dog hair, a little bit of a wool wash or gentle shampoo, and then roll it in a towel to wring it out, to squeeze most of the moisture out. So I'm actually going to stop the share for a second. What I do is I will soak it till it's fully saturated. This just isn't about just getting it damp. I want to fully wash it because, again, coffee, dog hair, chocolate. Okay. And then don't wring it, but you can get so much moisture out of something by just squeezing it. Roll it in a towel and squeeze it out. And then just smooth your hat out and lay it flat to dry. And that's it. That's really what we mean when we say blocking. It's not complicated, but it's worth it, because what blocking does is it evens the fabric out. It evens out your stitches. It makes everything look a bit more tidy. You see, with this one has had a wash, and it's just a little bit smoother. The stitches are a little bit tidier, but here you'll see there's a little bit of puckering where I did the increases. You might see some inconsistency. There's some looser stitches and some tighter stitches. And it might have things on it you might not want to, you might not want it to have. So it's a good thing to give it a wash just to settle it. And it just makes it look that much prettier. And I like to wash it, do that blocking step before I weave my ends in, because I know then the fabric is fully settled and tidy, and the ends are all going to be woven into my settled fabric. And don't worry, when you're washing it, the ends don't come loose. They absolutely don't. This one has been washed, and the ends, I promise you, haven't come loose. That's why I like to start my cast on with a knot. Cast your mind back to the first class. And also why I've left this really long, because I promise you it's not coming undone. So what we do is we poke it through to the middle of the work, through the middle. And I'm going to weave my ends in. And here I've actually got 4 ends. I've got my start and my end in my green, and I've got my start and my end in my lovely, delicious brown. Let me show you. On ribbing, here's how I weave the end into my ribbing. Yeah, let's make sure I can push that through the hole in my darning needle. If you do notice there's a bit of a gap, if you notice that there's some looseness in the start of your round, it's perfectly okay to use this tail. In fact, this is something I do all the time to sort of snug that up a little bit. So you can just weave across to close that up a bit more. So if you do have any looseness, never anything to worry about. Oh, I've got fluff here. Then what I do with ribbing, so I just run it up the rib on the inside. And you see, I'm actually kind of feeding the needle through the side edge of all of those stitches and just pulling it up. And when you pull it up, make sure that this looks tidy and you're not pulling it too tight so it's puckered. If you do pull it a bit tight and it puckers up, you can just stretch it out again. So it's worth always sort of assessing. And then you've gone up the knit rib, and I go back down the other side of the rib, like so. And the nice thing about using this wool is that those will stick very nicely. I always give it a little bit of a stretch, again, to make sure it's not puckered. And then I will snip that off. And I never snip it right close to the fabric because I don't want to be nervous about snipping a stitch. So I will be a little distance away, like so. For the top, what you can do is just find loops of the stitches at the top and just catch the loops of the stitches at the back and work around sort of in the round. When weaving in the end on the back of a stocking stitch fabric like this, you want to sort of go up and down on the diagonal so that it tucks in nicely and it doesn't wiggle its way out. And when I'm weaving in an end, I want about, at least I would say about 6 or 7 centimeters. And by the way, you can also be efficient about this. You can cheat. You don't have to do it loop by loop on the back there. I can run through a few stitches like so. Make sure you're just catching the back. And again, let's look to make sure I'm not puckering. I go down in one direction and then on the diagonal back in the other. And so about 6, 7, 8 centimeters, sort of, 3 inches worth of yarn. You don't need to make any knots. This is a gorgeous sticky wool, and I promise it will stay there. It will not wiggle its way out because you've wrapped it around so many stitches, and we just trim that off like so. Ta-da. Okay. Oh, a question from Dahlia. So there's many different techniques for weaving in ends. And what some instructions will tell you is that you can split the strands of your wool and weave half in one direction, half in the other. I actually don't, or is that, I wonder if that's what Dahlia is talking about. Dahlia may be talking about something else. There are so many different methods. You can split the plies and kind of weave them like they're 2 different separate ends of yarn. That's extra secure. That's one way of doing it. I tend not to do that for wool because wool is lovely and sticky. I would be a little bit more careful about things if I was using a cotton or a silk that wasn't sticky. Here, where I've got 4 ends, this is where I joined my color. The trick with weaving in where there's a color change is make sure that you stay only on its own color, if that makes sense, because you don't want them reading through. And so here with this brown, I'm just going to make sure that I'm staying in the loops of the brown. I've also heard some people say that what they do when they weave in ends, that instead of going just sort of under the loops of the stitch, I've heard people say sometimes that they'll put the darning needle through the middle of the stitch as if to split it. Again, with a wool, that's not necessary. Wool is beautifully sticky and frictiony, and it holds its place very nicely. I would do a method like that for something like a silk or a cotton where it doesn't have that stick. So there we go. That's how we weave our ends in. There's a few more things I want to talk about as well. I want to talk about what we can do on the top. Right. So once it's dry, that's probably of it. You wet it, you wash it, and then when it's dry, you weave your ends in. Oh, I have to talk about this very quickly. We didn't talk about this at all. So as you get into knitting more advanced things, people talk about tension and gauge. So tension or gauge, depending on where the pattern originates from, that's a way of assessing the size of your knitting. What we do if we're making a sweater, when we're making things where the fit really matters, is we make ourselves a little small practice piece so that we can make sure that what we're knitting is the right size. And that's really what that whole business around swatching for tension, swatching for gauge is. It's just to make sure your stitches are the right size so that your hat comes out to be the right size. Now, if your hat's a little bit looser, a little bit smaller, in this context, it doesn't matter so much. But for a garment, matters. So what you would do is you would take your finished and washed hat, and then you can measure it and see if it's coming out to be the right size. And really all we need to do when we're doing that, if it's slightly too loose, we might knit the second one on a smaller needle. If it's slightly too small, we might knit the second one on a bigger needle. That's all it's about. Anyway, so finishing touches. So look at these. I love, isn't part of the joy of a hat what the things you can put on it? So you can do tassels on pom-poms. And I made myself a tassel here, and I made this yesterday, and I had a little bit of the green left over because I was using leftovers, and I only had a tiny bit of the green. And so I used mostly with the brown, and I think it looks a little bit like a sea monster. With the different colors there, but I kind of sort of love it. And so what you do, if you make a pom-pom, you can use a little cardboard template that's outlined in the pattern instructions. You can also use one of these little plastic pom-pom makers. And what's nice about these is they're good and sturdy, and the size is predictable. And the way that you make them is you wrap the yarn around them. Oh, where's my yarn? You will just wrap the yarn around them. And the thing about making a pom-pom, I don't know about you, but I always feel a little bit nervous that it's going to be a little bit understuffed, a little bit floppy. Always wrap more than you think. An extra poofy pom-pom is better than one that's a little bit too floppy. And use different colors, as you can see in the pictures as well, in the pictures of the samples. And this you can use here, or you can use a little piece of cardboard. Speaking of which, there is another finishing element that I quite like with a little piece of cardboard. And it's in some ways a little bit simpler than a pom-pom. I've only got a tiny one here. I quite like a tassel. There's no reason why you couldn't make a tassel. And what's nice about a tassel is this works well even if you don't have a lot of yarn left over. And so to make a tassel, you just wrap yarn around a little rectangle of cardboard, and then you would thread yarn around the top here to make the hanging tie, and then you would tie yarn just around here as well to make yourself a tassel. You can find lots of instructions online. The thing that I did want to share with you, though, is a secret for attaching. So this is my last bonus tip. How do we attach a pom-pom to a hat? You'll notice I've got some long yarn hanging off this. I've got the yarn that I used to actually make the pom-pom, but I've also got finer yarn. This was the one that I used for the final tie, and it's finer because it's how I attach. I'm going to use a button. I have a button here, and if we sew a button to the inside of the hat, I'm going to do this very quickly. I'm using finer yarn. We sew a button, and the way that you sew the button is much the same way you weave the ends in. You just catch the strands into the back of the hat here. I do that a few more times to make it secure. Then pull the ends through to the inside. And what you will do is you actually tie the pom-pom ends around the button, because this allows you to remove it. This lighter purple here is just the yarn that I use to attach the button. What you should do, and what I will do when we're finished, is I will weave that in securely to make sure the button itself doesn't move. But this yarn, this is the tail from the pom-pom, and I'm not going to weave that in. I might snip it a little bit shorter so it doesn't get caught in my hair or dangle out of my hat. But that counterbalances the pom-pom, It does. It looks like a sea monster. I think it counterbalances the weight of the pom-pom because a big chunky pom-pom can get heavy. It also allows me to remove it if I need to wash this. So always use a button. Oof. All right, let's put this on. What do you think? These need to be just tucked into the inside of the hat, and the pom-pom, no matter how heavy, stays up because it's counterbalanced with that button. All right. So we will close up because I know that we just have run out of time here. So the recordings are available on the Fibre Company's YouTube channel. So please do visit. You'll be able to see all of them. And you can definitely make sure tag the Fibre Company, show us what you've made. You can leave a review of the class and stay in touch. I want to see your hats and I want to see if you've made a slightly more, I sort of like the random colors in the pom-pom, Daphne. What do you think?
I love it. What's wrong with sea monsters?
Yeah, it's true. It's good. It's good. Yeah. So excellent. So I think we have some hats and some happy hat knitters, I hope.
Yeah, I'm sure we do. At least some
Good.
on their way, if not completely finished. And please do share those with us. Kate, thank you so much. This has been great. I think we've created some hat makers, and hopefully, it's just one of those projects that's so easy to make for yourself. I certainly get a new one for myself every year. My husband and I each get new hats every year. And it's just a great fun thing to do at the start of the colder weather.
It is. And when you've got so many gorgeous colors to choose from, see, I need to finish this one up. It's a little bit small for me because this is intended as a gift. Somebody, I hope they're not watching, but someone in my life is going to be receiving this very soon. But yeah, absolutely. They're a joy to knit. They're a quick project and they're a skill builder too. So I hope everybody's felt like they've tackled some new skills, learned some new things, and go digging around in your button box for that all important button for your pom-pom.
I like that tip button. I don't normally do that. I just normally put mine under there and tie it loosely so I can pull it off. So a button is a great way.
It helps. It stays up a bit more, I think.
Yeah. I can see that. Cool.
Yeah. Excellent.
Well, thank you so much, Kate. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us and, taking the little adventure with us. If you have any questions about the classes, certainly email us. I've put links in. You're all registered, so you will receive an email tomorrow with the link to the recording for this class. The first two are already up on YouTube, so you can go back and review those. And definitely share pictures of you and your hat, and just happy hat knitting to you.
Happy hat knitting. This with the start of winter, and I wish everybody a warm and happy holiday season and into the winter. And I look forward to seeing everybody in their stylish color combos with their giant pom-poms.
Thank you, Kate. Same to you. And happy Thanksgiving to our American friends.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay,
bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.